Hi there, my name is Leigh Macfarlane. I am a Canadian author of romance and romantic suspense novels. I live in the beautiful Okanagan Valley of British Columbia. Today, I'm going to be reading to you from Walking Walrus Cafe. Everyone see the cover? Walking Walrus Cafe is book one in my new Peachland Passions series. Walking Walrus Cafe is set in Peachland, which is about 45 minutes down the road from my house, south of here. It is one of my favorite places in the world. I wouldn't mind retiring there someday if I can afford it. And I really wanted to record this video for you in Peachland, but due to COVID regulations at the moment, I wasn't able to do that. So thank you for watching, and I am going to get started. Hi, and welcome to the Okanagan of British Columbia. Right behind me, you're seeing Kalamalka Lake. And we're going to try and record this out here because it's just so beautiful. Don't know how well it's going to work or how loud the background noise is going to be, so we're going to give it a shot and see what happens. Walking Walrus Cafe, Chapter 8. Indian food. Brett put the Mercedes into park and released Monya's hand. She'd let him play with her fingers the entire way here, even though he could tell it distracted her when she tried to speak. Well, it occurs to me that taking a restaurateur to dinner puts a certain amount of pressure on me to choose well. I figured Indian is one dish you likely don't cook often, and I've eaten at Ashoka before and it didn't disappoint, unless you don't care for curry. I'm a big fan of curry, but for the record, I'm not that hard to please. No? Brett grinned at her, then opened his door. Good to know for next time. Monya blinked at Brett as Brett jumped out of the car. He thought there was going to be a next time? She felt the funny little blip in the base of her belly as nerves combined with pleasure. Like riding a bike. She reached down for her purse, and when Monya glanced up again, Brett had her door open, was standing, looking amazingly handsome, waiting to help her out of the car. Her heart gave a little thump. She was afraid she may even have given a quiet but audible sigh. Ridiculous. She was being ridiculous. They were just a man and a woman eating a meal together. Nothing to get so stirred up over. Even if Brett was the most beautiful man she could remember laying eyes on in a very long time. Being in his company made her feel 20 years younger. So this is their date, and now we're going to flip ahead. Now, for those of you who are collecting points, this is where you want to start paying attention. You want to get out of here then? Monya's mouth quirked. It was just such a line, and even though she knew he didn't mean it that way, she liked the way it sounded. He made her feel young and female, and parts of her that had been asleep a long time felt like they were waking up. I could use some fresh air, she said, and her eyelashes took on a will of their own and fluttered up at him. He was looking at her as intently as he had at the painting earlier, and Monya felt her eyes lock with his. Suddenly, it seemed mighty hot in this little room. The night air was welcome on her skin when she stepped outside. They didn't touch as they walked the boardwalk, strolling slowly. Monya could hear the quiet slap of her shoes against the wood, the rhythmic thud of waves spending themselves in long, bubbling streams against the beach. The moon was almost full, with only the tiniest of bites out of it, and as they watched, Monya saw its reflection dance with the dark shadows of the waves. They walked past the local casino and into the darker shadows of the beach, and when Monya kicked off her shoes to walk barefoot through the sand, Brett smiled and joined her. She wandered all the way to the edge of the water, then walked in the damp sand at the water's edge. Monya liked the way the occasional wave pushed far enough up onto the beach to tickle against her toes, and once even her ankles. The water, for all its beauty, was fairly freezing this earlier in the season. And it didn't take long before Monya's toes had started to feel a bit like icicles. She moved back up the beach, pausing under the deeper shadow of a tree to slip her feet back into her shoes. She laughed gently when her hair drifted into her eyes and, standing on one leg as she fit her foot into her shoe, she felt her balance begin to tip. Reaching out, she braced a hand against Brett's shoulder to steady herself as she slipped her other foot into a shoe. She was laughing, her face smiling and relaxed, when she tipped it up to Brett's. The laughter slid away when she saw the bemused way Brett was looking at her. Wordlessly, he reached out and brushed the hair away from her face, then twirled the strands between his fingers before tucking them behind her ear. "You look beautiful in moonlight, Manya," he said. His tone was serious, the look on his face utterly sincere, and his words melted her heart, softened her smile. For a moment, she thought he might kiss her. Then he turned slightly away. "If it's okay with you, I'd like to hold your hand." She found she couldn't answer, could only nod. When he reached for her hand, she shivered, and a smile of private pleasure lit her eyes. In the dark, they glowed up at him, dark and fathomless like the water of the lake, with reflections that ran just as deep. "So," Brett said as they started walking again, "how is it that you are single?" "Me?" Manya laughed. "I've been asking myself the same thing about you." "Well," Brett said, "I travel a lot. Doesn't make for a great marriage, at least that's what Trina," he glanced at Manya quickly before looking down the stretch of beach again, "the ex-wife, said right before she called her lawyers." "I'm sorry," Manya said. "A recent split?" "No," he laughed. "We split when Alicia was 7, almost 20 years ago. Wow, time flies." 20 years? And all this time you've never tried again?" They'd reached the farthest point of the beach, and out of the darkness, the looming shadow of an old steamship arose out of the night. Brett stopped walking, turned to look at the old stern-wheeler. It was lit up with strands of white lights which traced the outline of the vessel, turned it into a beautiful but haunting reminder of days gone by. "Well, our problems weren't all on me, but she wasn't wrong about the traveling thing. I don't like to repeat my mistakes, and I wasn't ready to give it up. I did live with a woman for a couple of years." He shrugged, grinned. "She's married now, to a banker." Then he nodded in the direction of the boat. "Have you been here before?" Manya blinked at the quick change of subject. She was still pondering his choice of the past tense when he spoke of traveling. Brett's future wasn't her business. She turned her attention to the illuminated boat. "A couple times, but actually never at night. It's lovely like this, isn't it?" He murmured his agreement, walked nearer until the hull of the boat towered up above them. Still holding Manya's hand, Brett started moving around the ship. Built to service the fruit growers of the region, the SS Sicamous had once traveled between Penticton, Kelowna, and Vernon, making the trip up Okanagan Lake daily. During the Great Depression years, the shipping company could no longer compete with the newly built Kettle Valley Railway, and the Sicamous was decommissioned and turned into a museum. "How long has she been dry docked here, I wonder?" Brett murmured as he continued his slow walk around the vessel. "Oh, I know this, actually," Manya said. "She was decommissioned in 1936 and has been a museum at this site since 1937. Brett looked at Manya with amused amazement. "How do you possibly know that?" She met the look on his face with a grin of her own. Then she shrugged a shoulder depreciatingly. "I don't know. I was curious, so I read up about her once. You know, there used to be many steam-wheelers serving the Okanagan towns. It was just a faster way to travel than horseback, but most of those boats rotted away. This one," Manya said, nodding up at the ship, "was different from the others because her hull was made of steel instead of wood. That's really the only reason the Sicamous has survived all these years." "Is that so?" His tone was low as he turned towards her. They'd circled around to the back of the boat, and Manya now stood with her back to the giant wheel that had once propelled the ship through the water. Manya's face was in shadow, but the lights that adorned the vessel shone in her hair, danced in untamed little patterns across her shoulders and the front of her dress. Looking at her, Brett knew he'd remember this moment. The way he was looking at her was making Manya nervous. Her mouth felt dry suddenly, and she licked her lips. She was an expensive craft to build, Monia said, babbling now. I think it cost something like $180,000 to build her back in 1913, and then she was only in service for a little over 2 decades. She swallowed when Brett took a step nearer. I looked that up once too. That calculates to over $4.5 million today. Brett's eyebrows lifted. That's a lot. It's hard to imagine they made that back, she said. Then, when Brett cupped her cheek in his hand, asked, "What are you doing?" He smiled, and she saw the lights glint off his teeth. It made the nerves in her stomach flutter. Smart women turn me on. Monia laughed nervously. If she hadn't been backed up against the little moat which had been built to accommodate the mighty stern wheel, she might have stepped back. Anybody with access to Wikipedia could know any of that. Doesn't mean I'm smart, doesn't it? Brett murmured. He took another step towards her until their bodies were almost touching. Lifting his other hand, Brett cupped the back of her neck. Monia, I'm going to kiss you now. Wait, she said, her voice slightly panicked as she put her palm up against his chest as if to ward him off. Her panic made his eyes crinkle at the corners. She noticed because he looked deeply into her eyes for what was merely seconds, but felt like long minutes. When she didn't push him away, his lips settled softly on hers. They moved with intricate patience, brushing against hers until her eyes drifted closed, and the fingers which had intended to push him away curled into his shirt instead. He kissed her in a way that let Monia know he wasn't a complete gentleman after all. Rather, with her, he was just being patient and gentle. But there were undercurrents to his kiss which let her know he could be much more demanding when he chose. And those tidal currents wanted to drag her under with him. Well, Monia said when his lips lifted. Okay. Hands still cupping her face, Brett's eyes searched hers. I was hoping for more than okay. Monia took a shuddering breath, realized her entire system was trembling. Reaching up, she placed her hands on top of his. She gently peeled his fingers off her face, but she kept her hands wrapped around his fists, rested her chin on top of their joined hands. Looking up at him, she felt one last shudder pass through her system. Knew there was no chance he hadn't felt it too. You did okay. She smiled up at him, then released her hold on his hands and took a single step sideways. It put just that hairline breadth of distance between them and perversely made Brett want to close the gap. So he did. He didn't touch her, just kept his eyes locked on hers and stepped his body back into her personal space. It made her grunt out a half laugh. He had a bit of a cat chasing the canary thing going on, which Monia surprised herself by thinking made her one lucky canary. When she shivered, rubbed her hands up and down her arms, the look on Brett's face changed. You're cold. He shrugged out of his blazer immediately and reached around her to lay the coat across her shoulders. Eyes intent, Brett slid his fingers into her hair and lifted the locks out from under the collar of his jacket. His action started her trembling all over again. I think you should take me home now, Monia said. And when Brett's eyebrows winged up, she laughed and pushed at his chest until he backed up a step. Not like that. Running scared, he shook his head in mock disappointment. I never would have figured for the type. She gave him a look that was as full of amusement as it was of rejection. Running a business, she corrected. And I get up early. You're running away, he insisted with a knowing nod, because you like the way I kiss. His arrogance made her laugh, which he'd intended, and the sound of her laughter got an instantaneous, open smile from him. When he offered her his arm, she accepted immediately and surprised to find herself utterly relaxed at his side. Monia fully enjoyed their slow walk back to his car. And that is how first dates should go. Walking Walrus Cafe. It comes out on Canada Day, and you can buy it in ebook or in paperback off of Amazon or Smashwords or any of Smashwords distributors. Thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoyed this episode of Walking Walrus Cafe. Happy Canada Day!